Well, thanks for being here. And tonight, we're just going to have a brief sort of, well, hopefully, whenever Monday says brief, I guess you guys go, yeah, whatever. But have a look at some of the main kind of root numbers in Revelation and how they play themselves out. The reason that I guess we're doing this is we want to remember the symbolism that we said right at the beginning Revelation contains. Because it is an apocalyptic book, because it has this kind of literature, all the symbols in the book are meant to contain and convey meaning, but also emotion with the meaning. So even the numbers are meant to kind of, as you read them or as you hear them read, they're meant to make you not only understand something, but understand it kind of in your gut, to use language from the beginning. Kind of, we use the same when we speak about emotive stuff. We say things like my heart was bursting, I was so excited. And that's not really what was happening, but that conveys the level of excitement that we spoke of. So on Sunday, we did Revelation 4 and 5. And this is the image that was presented to 7 horns and 7 eyes. Now, if we read everything in Revelation literally, then we'd have a number of really weird images of Jesus throughout the book. So you'd have this. You'd have the vision we saw in chapter 1, where he, had a sword coming out of his mouth and things like that. So we want to argue that along with the other images in the book, the numbers in Revelation contain and convey meaning. So numbers in the Bible carry weight, they carry implications, and they're used to describe or refer to certain things. So, for example, the most obvious one is if I use the number 7, from the biblical perspective, you guys would kind of understand a bit what I meant. The first thing that we think of when we think of 7 is the days of creation, right, in Genesis 1 and number 2. So 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. And that's why our weeks are shaped like that in the Christianized world, shaped in 7, 6 days for work, 1 day for rest. The benefit of having lived in Christianized societies for the last 300 years is we've now got 2 days of rest in theory, because Christians argued that workers should be given more time with their families in the Industrial Revolution. Anyway, that's an aside. The number 12, you think to yourself, is it coincidence that Jesus picked 12 disciples? Why didn't he pick 11 or 10 or 20 or 100 for that matter? Why did he pick 12? Because in picking 12, he actually was saying something. And we'll come to that in a moment. So we want to read the numbers in Revelation and think very carefully about what they mean and where they come from. Now, there are the big 5 in Revelation when we look at numbers. And they are number 2, number 7, number 4, number 7, number 10, and number 12. One can argue that from these 5 numbers, you'll get most of the numerical references in Revelation. You'll notice I don't have 144,000 there. And it's not because I want to avoid a hot potato, but it's because we'll deal with it later on. So 4 of these big 5, the numbers 4, 7, 10, and 12, deal with a fullness or completeness in some way or another. And so what I want to do for us this evening is just go through each of these numbers, show us where they come, not every occurrence in Revelation, but where we see them, what they're trying to convey, and then how we can think of them and look at them as we go on. Before we start, you might wonder where the number 3 is, considering that we have the Father, Son, and Spirit. While we do see all 3 members of the Trinity at play in Revelation, I guess there's not the same focus on the number 3 as there is on these big 5. So that's why it's missing. Before we get into them, are there any questions that you might have as we kick off? or things that you're wondering that you'd like us to cover while we're busy. So maybe I can refer to it as we go through it. Anything that you guys are burning to know? Cool. Well, feel free to, maybe what I'll do is at the end of every number, we'll have a chance to just kind of go over some things. I hope you have your Bible open. And can you go to Revelation chapter 11? We'll have some of the texts on there, so if you don't have it. First number is 2. In Revelation 11, we come across 2 witnesses. And for some folks, if you've ever read the Left Behind series, they literally have 2 people who bear witness in the city of Jerusalem. So in this vision, John sees these 2, and God says, or Jesus says, I'll grant my 2 witnesses authority to prophesy for 1,260 days dressed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. So are these literally 2 people, or is this something else? And as we are reading Revelation symbolically, we're going to say it's something else. We're going to say the number 2 is actually referring to the church. Now, the reason we say that is because in verse 4, we see that these are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. And we've heard the phrase lampstands before, haven't we? That was in chapter 1, where the lampstands are the church. So you might go, okay, fine, I get that, but why is there now 2 here? That's slightly confusing. Well, for that, then you go, okay, the number 2 in the Bible, also, it ought to ring a bell. That's why it's a big 5 in the book. It ought to ring a bell for us, and it takes us back to Deuteronomy. And in Deuteronomy, this is kind of the laws for Israel that Moses kind of reminds the people of, and he says, 1 witness cannot establish any iniquity or sin against a person, whatever that person has done. A fact must be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. So at the heart of the number 2 is the fact that if you are going to be a witness, if you are going to witness to something or or having seen something, you want at least 2 people to bear witness so that you know that that witness is going to be truthful. And you want to establish the facts by those two witnesses. We actually saw that in our previous series when we looked at the things that Jesus does that's countercultural. In the sermon we looked at called Don't Get Mad, Get Reconciled. There's this verse. For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am there among them. The verse that we said we always understand wrong when we think it just applies to Bible studies. The 2 witnesses there, where 2 or 3, you see it's a direct reference to the passage in Deuteronomy. It means that when you're talking about what we call church discipline, or kind of going to a brother who sinned against you, you know that the truth is being spoken because there are 2 or 3 gathered together, having established the facts and making a decision on this. So the fact that John talks about 2 witnesses, or 2 olive trees, or 2 lampstands in Revelation 11, and we can then say he's talking about the church, is we're saying the lampstands refers to the church. The fact that there are 2 witnesses is symbolic of saying the church is truthfully witnessing to Jesus in today's world, in today's day and age. I think what further enriches this whole idea is that the language of olive trees and lampstands comes from the book of Zechariah, which is, I think as Nathan pointed out a few weeks ago, it's one of the main sources of Old Testament language in Revelation. And in the book of Zechariah, there are 2 people who are appointed, and they're appointed by God. One is Joshua, who is the priest. The other is Zerubbabel, the king. And they're referred to as the olive trees and the lampstands, or the olive trees and lampstands, yeah. So it's interesting, Joshua the priest, Zerubbabel the king, priest and king, that also should ring a bell for us in Revelation. Because in Revelation 1 and 5, and in fact in 7 places in total in Revelation, we see or we hear that Jesus the Lamb purchases people with his blood and makes them into a kingdom and priests, or kingdom of priests. So we have here this whole idea of the church's mission, the church's witness in the world. And we'll actually see a lot more of that when we preach through chapter 11. But it's in priestly activity that we proclaim God to the world. So that's the idea of being a priesthood. It's royal activity, I guess, in that we call the world to submit to King Jesus. And in fact, if you're aware, some of you might be aware that a lot of people will speak of Jesus' role in the world as kind of being threefold, that he's king, priest, and prophet. And in chapter 11, you see all 3 of those at play. If the church is a kingdom of priests witnessing to Jesus, we also, in verse 3, you read there that there is a prophecy by these 2 witnesses. So the church is actually taking the role of priest, prophet, well, not taking the role. It's doing kingly roles, royal roles, and prophetic roles, and speaking to the world about Christ. So that's the idea behind 2. I think any questions on that? Must I slow down for the next ones? Yes, okay. Thanks for nodding. So the number 2, when we read it, that's referring to the church. Here are 2 witnesses. The reason I've added this into the big 5 is because the book of Revelation has such a strong theme of the church living in witness to Christ, running throughout it. And I think that makes chapter 11 quite a key chapter in the book. The next one is number 4. Sorry, just quickly, any questions on number 2? Going once, going twice? We'll stop at going twice. James, yeah.
1260. It's not on number 2, but it was in the passage you showed.
Yes, I'll get to it in a moment.
Okay.
Never mind. At the end. Thank you. Okay, so number 4 is a number that represents natural completion or fullness. I think, as I mentioned in the beginning, a lot of these numbers refer in some way or another to fullness of some kind. So the idea of 4, we have that as well in English. They came from all 4 corners of the world, we would say. You know that it would indicate completion. They came from everywhere. There wasn't a part of the world they did not come from. And in many ancient cultures and religions, you see this. It's not just actually in the Bible's language, where the world is divided into 4 spheres. The idea of 4 encompasses everything. It's I had a whole list of them, I can't remember now, it doesn't matter. But you actually see the number 4 also all the way back in Genesis chapter 2, where we have it in the Garden of Eden. There's a river that goes out from the garden that waters the world, in a sense. And there are 4 rivers that come out from it: the Pishon, the Gihon, the Tigris, and the Euphrates. That's there in Genesis 2:10-14. So not only does that help to give us a geographical location for the Garden of Eden, but you could argue that the author of Genesis is making the point that all life in the world flowed out from the Garden of Eden. And because from the Middle Eastern perspective, that is where all life was, between the Pishon, the Gihon, the Tigris, and the Euphrates. And I think this idea is replicated or supported in Revelation 22, where we see the river of life, the river of the water of life, flows from the throne of God and the Lamb down the streets of the new creation. So a similar idea to Eden, where it goes to all 4, down these 4 rivers, in other words, to all 4 corners of the globe, so to speak, symbolically. In Revelation 22, it does the same. From the throne of God and the Lamb down the street. So the number 4 occurs in a couple of really key places in Revelation, and it's mostly related to creation. We saw one of the big ones this past Sunday, when we met the 4 living creatures covered with eyes in front and in back who were around the throne on each side. They represented all of creation. We mentioned that. If you look at them, I think the fact that the one is like a lion, the one is like an ox, the one is the face of a man, the 4th living creature is like a flying eagle, and each of them is on each side of the throne. You see there in Revelation 4:6. So they represent creation, all creation. And in a sense, their song around the throne is very similar to what David says when he says creation proclaims the glory of God. Day and night it pours forth speech. That's the same idea as what these 4 living creatures give us. So it's a completion of a number of the whole of the world, the whole of the universe says God is fantastic. And then quite key in the text that we're looking at this weekend, we have, oh no, my picture isn't showing. We have the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse who arrive in chapter 6. And they represent, because there are 4 of them, the white one, the red one, the black one, and the pale green one, they represent a totality of disaster. We'll see this Sunday. It's man's wickedness against one another in its totality. The white horse is conquest, the red horse is war, the black horse is famine and injustice, and the pale green horse is death. And so this is saying that these 4 horsemen encompass all of these types of wickedness that humanity perpetrates against each other. But there is this comfort in this whole idea, and that's that passage there in chapter 7, verse 1. After this, I saw 4 angels. Now, notice how he repeats it. 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, restraining the 4 winds of the earth, so that no wind could blow on the earth or the sea or on any tree. So there again, he's making the point that at the 4 corners of the world, there's the whole of creation. There are these 4 angelic beings, 4 angels, making sure that things are not totally annihilated, which we'll see. I'm going to skim over it now because we'll speak on it in more detail on Sunday. But just as there are 4 horsemen, there are these 4 angels restraining things until the time is right. And so there's this comfort for Christians who face death and famine, etc. So yeah, I don't want to give too much away, but this is basically God holding back the final judgment while he gathers his people in, him making sure that none of the great global multitude is missed out. And the number 4 gives us, I guess, the symbolic image that this multitude is coming from all over the world, from all 4 corners of the world. So there's this completion there that we see with the number 4. I'm going to stop there before I waffle too much. Any questions on 4? No? Okay. The next one I think is the big one, and it's the number 7. Number 7 is, again, an idea of completion, but this time in the idea of perfection. Generally speaking about God, it is key here for identifying, I guess, holiness and total perfection. I think it's a key number that runs throughout the Bible. It stems from the 7 days of creation, as we spoke, and it shapes the rhythm of human existence. So in the Old Testament, you see both that God's people are given a 7-day week, where 6 days of work, 1 day of rest, but then they're also given cyclical periods of 7 years. So after 7 times 7 years, 49 years, you'd have slaves that were to be set free, land that you may have lost in bad debt or bad ideas, bad planning would be returned to you. In theory, I don't know whether it ever actually happened with the people of Israel, but the idea was that after 7 by 7, you would have everything restored to how God intended it to be when he divided up the land. 7 is complete perfection. And just one other one where we see it in the New Testament. Peter comes up to Jesus after that idea of if your brother sins against you, and he says, Lord, how many times must I forgive my brother? Must I forgive him 7 times? And he thinks he's being smart because 7 is like the perfect number. If I forgive my brother 7 times, then I'm surely behaving like God does. And Jesus says to him, no, dude, 7 times 7 or 70 times 7, which is 7 by 7 by 10. And we'll get to that later. It's even more perfect than you think, Peter. So he's showing him up by using the number 7 as well. Now, Revelation is actually shaped in 7s almost. We see it for the first time when in chapter 1, where John says he's writing to 7 churches. And while these are actual churches, the fact that John writes to 7 of them in Asia and he excludes other prominent churches. The church in Colossae was a prominent church, and others would have been, as important. He excludes those. I think it gives rise to the belief that the 7 churches are not just actual churches, but they symbolize the church, the global church as a whole. And that is why people say, that is why Jesus ends each of the messages with, let him who has ears to hear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches, because each of these messages has relevance because it is speaking to the complete church. Now, each major section of Revelation consists of 7 things. There are 7 churches, there are 7 seals, there are 7 trumpets, there's 7 bowls, there's 7 peals of thunder. And so it brings across the idea that in all of God's judgment, as we're going to see it playing out now in the rest of the book of Revelation, there is perfection in it. It is complete. He's not unjust in his judgment in that he judges too little or too much. He judges just the right amount. It is perfect in its goodness. And that's the repetition of the 7. Other interesting 7 occurrences in the book there are 7 repetitions of the phrase every tribe, tongue, and nation. 7 repetitions of the phrase the Lord God Almighty, which some of the translations will write the Lord God of hosts or the Lord God of armies, which is Isaiah's language for God. So 7 repetitions, and it's a great phrase of how to speak about God in a book like Revelation, because if he is the Lord of armies, he is the Lord who is able to carry out judgment. He is the Lord who is able to protect his people from wickedness and judgment, because he is the Lord of armies. There's a power there in it. And there are also so the word Jesus is mentioned 14 times, which is a multiple of 7. The word Lamb is mentioned 28 times, which is 4 times 7. I haven't seen this in any of the books I've read, but my thinking on it is the fact that Jesus is mentioned 14 times, which is 2 times 7, is combining the idea of 2, which we spoke about earlier, the witness, and the idea of 7, and that Jesus, the man, bore perfect witness to God. No one has ever seen God, but the Son has made him known. This is my theory, and not supported by anything I've read. So take it with 7 tables of salt, pinches of salt. And 28 times is 4 times 7, and the Lamb is, this. Is able to make holy everyone from all 4 corners of the earth. Again, use that with 7 pinches of salt. I guess the one thing that makes 7 such a big thing as well is what it is not in the book of Revelation. Perfection belongs to God. That's the idea of 7. And because of that, we need to just briefly take 6 falls just short of God. And so it might look good, but it is incomplete. As 7 is perfect, 6 is imperfect. 6 is the number that Jewish rabbis use to refer to humanity in the sort of the Jewish tradition. So when we look at chapter 13, verse 18, we get a very famous passage. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, because it is the number of a person, and its number is 666. At this point, if I was technically able, I would be playing in the background Iron Maiden's song, The Number of the Beast, which is pretty frightening, but has this whole idea there. So what is the number of the beast? 666. What does it mean? We are going to think about it a bit more when we get to chapters 12 and 13. I think for now, it's good to remind ourselves when we look at Revelation that we need to be pretty humble, because especially as this, we need to be careful. If we follow through with what I've been saying, from the start, that there is symbolism in the book, and the numbers are symbolic as well. And I think this verse begins to make a lot more sense. My understanding of the beasts in chapter 12 and 13 is that the second beast is the beast of false religion, of religion that looks good, because when we get to it, we'll see the beast is, he's got horns, looks like he's been slain. There's a whole bunch of stuff that makes him look like the real deal, but he isn't the real deal. And the thing with false religion is it's often very human-centered. It's centered around us, and in a sense, worshipping us. I think the best illustration at the moment of this kind of false religion in the extreme is the prosperity gospel. It looks great, and it has a lot of it looks impressive, and it seems to be stuff that is here and now and good, and it makes people get what they want, etc. But it is not God-focused, it is man-focused. So it would be the ideal candidate to be the number 6. And those who don't bow to this beast, if this false religion is state-sponsored, which it definitely was in John's time, you have your livelihood threatened. That's the whole idea in Revelation 13 of, if you don't have a number on your forehead, you aren't able to buy or sell any goods. You struggle to live in the world if you don't bow to this beast. So 666, in my understanding, is the counter number to 777. So if you took the number 7, which is perfection, and you took it 3 times, and you almost said, instead of saying 3 by 7, you would say holy, 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 then 666 is unholy, unholy, unholy. As God is holy, 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 the false religion perpetrated by the second beast is unholy, unholy, unholy. So you need wisdom, as verse 8 says, not necessarily to figure out who it is, but wisdom to know that while false religion or man-focused religion looks impressive and is often very powerful and influential, it is imperfect. It is completely imperfect. Questions on that for now? I'm going to stop there for a bit. you don't want to ask out loud, feel free to put it on the chat. I don't know if I'll be able to get it, but maybe Edge will, and you'll let me know.
Mandy, I've got a question, Craig.
Yeah, go, Craig.
You're looking at the significance of the numbers from a sort of, if you want to say, positive perspective. What about when the numbers, like in this case, you've got the two beasts, and so they're same numbers, but are used very much in a negative context within Revelation? Is there any significance in that, do you think?
So the fact that there are two beasts, are you?
I just use that as one example, but I mean, there are others in Revelation where, I mean, you've highlighted 2 as a strong number. And
I didn't even think about the beast, but yeah, I guess.
I noticed like the beast, it comes out there, he had 2 horns. So that also like, but yet it's a negative, the beast, I don't know.
The imperfect witnesses to all that which opposes God. But yeah, I must admit, I'd need to look into that a bit more.
thanks, man.
Cool. Anyone else? Okay, everyone take a deep breath. We've sprinted through 3 of these numbers. Okay, onto the leopard. Number 10. So number 10 is a number that indicates completeness in the sense that it is all that is needed, or it's enough. Think about the number of fingers you have and the number of toes you have. To have fewer fingers than 10 would be to be short-handed. To have more fingers than 10, I guess, would be a little bit weird. 10 is all you need. So the number 10 is a complete period. It is a complete sort of planned time or space. So the first time we see the number 10 is where the church in Smyrna is told they will experience affliction for 10 days. And that kind of gives them the idea, it's not a literal 10 days from Monday to next Wednesday. It is a period of time that is enough. Not any more, not any less. It is set, and that is what they're going to have. That will be as planned, as expected. But where 10 really comes into play in the book of Revelation is in its multiples. So a number that you'll see more than 10 is the number 1,000. So think again about multiples. So take 7. We've just spoken about 7. 777 is complete perfection. 666 is complete imperfection. You have 10 times 10 times 10, and 10 is a number of everything that is needed or planned or expected. Then 10 times 10 times 10, which is 1,000, is humongous. It's huge. And so in a similar way to what we use thousands, Revelation is using it. If I go to a concert and I come home and someone says to me, how many people at the concert? I'll say, there were thousands of people. That is, there were so many, the place was filled to capacity. That's what the thousands sort of helps us to understand. And it's the same idea here in Revelation. Multiples of 10 indicate fullness as replete. There's as many that can be handled. And so when we see anything in the thousands, and here we're touching on the idea of the 144,000 again, we're immediately going, okay, this is a lot. This is many. And that leads me on to 12, which is an idea of covenant completeness. I touched on this in the beginning where why did Jesus choose 12 disciples? Because in the Old Testament, the covenant people of God were existed in 12 tribes. Jacob had 12 sons. There were 12 leaders of what would become the Old Testament people of God. And so Jesus chooses 12 disciples. Now, at the end of the book, when John sees a vision of the New Jerusalem, the number 12 is repeated frequently to signify the fact that the new creation will be filled with all of the old covenant as well as all of the new covenant people of God. So chapter 21, verse 20-14, has John being showed the holy city, Jerusalem. The city had massive high walls with 12 gates. 12 angels were at the gates. The names of the 12 tribes of Israel's sons were inscribed on the gates. The city wall had 12 foundations. The 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb were on the foundations. So here you have this idea of, the more he says 12, the more you have the impression that God is not missing anyone out. Anyone who is part of his covenant is there, and there is space for them. So the wall of the city is 144 cubits, which is 12 times 12. And so it indicates not, I think, the literal size of the New Jerusalem, as if, you know, everyone's going to have to squeeze in there, because I don't think 144 cubits is that massive. But it is an indication that there is room for everyone. If you take the completion of the 12 tribes of Israel, the Old Covenant people of God, you take the completion of the New Covenant people of God based on the apostles and the prophets, the church, then you have space, 144, you have space for all of them. The new city is going to fit all of us into it, which is fantastic. It's part of the beauty and the glory of the New Jerusalem. And then you also have, and this is the one I've alluded to, the number 12 and the number 10 combined in some form to symbolize something massive. Here's the 144,000. 144,000 is 12 times 12 times 1,000. In other words, the 12 of the Old Covenant people, the 12 of the New Covenant people, and 1,000, many. So it's not just saying, you know, there's going to be billions of people. It's saying that the many people are going to be those from the covenant. All who should be there will be there, and they are many. So in chapter 7, if you have a look at chapter 7 there, and those two verses I've just picked up, we'll speak about this on Sunday as well, is you have these 144,000 from every tribe of the Israelites, 12 from the tribe of Judah, 12 from the tribe of Reuben, Gad, etc. And then after this, he looks, and there's a vast multitude from every nation, tribe, people, and language, which no one can number, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. If you understand Revelation in the symbolic way that we're speaking about, and my understanding of it is that the vast multitude there in verse 9 is the same as the 144,000. Because 144,000 is not indicating a specific number, it is indicating the multitude of the covenant people of God, of the Old Covenant and the New Covenant, sealed for eternity in the midst of God's judgment in the world. There is, I guess this is a difficult one that one has to work through, because it seems to be so clearly literal and numeric. Those 144,000 sealed from every tribe of the Israelites, 12,000 sealed from the tribe of Judah, 12,000 from the tribe of Reuben. So a lot of people will go, but hang on a second. You know, this is pretty clearly like numbers. You know, there's not 11,999 people from Reuben, there's 12,000 people. And I do still think, I'm not convinced on that, for a number of reasons. The first one, if we stick with the numbers idea, 12 and 1,000 means the certainty that no one from that kind of part of the covenant people will missed. The second thing is, if you know your, what do you call it? You know, when so-and-so begat so-and-so and so-and-so begat so-and-so. What's the phrase, the word for that? It's totally struck a blank.
Genealogy.
Genealogies, thank you. If you think of the genealogies in the Bible, because I know most of you guys will study those long and hard and know them off by heart. Israel is never spoken of in this order. Judah never comes first. It's always Reuben who comes first. So here you might say, look, Judah comes first because it's from the tribe of Judah that Jesus comes. Yeah, you could argue that. But it's Reuben, Gad, Asher, Naphtali. That's not in order of birth, which is what they always are in the Old Testament. So that's one thing that makes it different. I'm not sure why either. And then what's interesting in this genealogy here is that the name of Joseph is included, and he's never included in the Old Testament. It's always his sons Manasseh and the other oak, Ephraim, who are included. And Levi is never included in the tribes because Manasseh and am I right? Well, Manasseh and Ephraim are always there. So this genealogy is very, very different from those that are in the Old Testament where Jacob's sons are referred to. So I think it makes a literal reading of these numbers tricky, even more tricky than the symbolic reading. What you do find, as I mentioned, is if you take 12, you multiply it by 12, you multiply it by 1,000, it indicates a vast number of all of God's people. None of them are missing, none of them are lost, which is what chapter 7 is actually getting at. You know, in the CSB, which I'm looking at the moment, the heading of the chapter is The Sealed of Israel. And our sermon title for Sunday is Jesus wants us to know we are sealed. So I think that is the point of these numbers, is just to give us the fullness of this idea here. Okay, James, any questions on that? I know I'm rushing through this. It was rush through it and have it be shorter, or go really slow and have this be very long and everyone stay very late, and then it's probably counterproductive as well. So please don't feel shy to ask any questions.
Mandy, just quickly, why is Dan excluded from this list?
Yes, so sorry, that's the guy who was excluded. The commentators say Dan's excluded from this list because right at the beginning, Dan went astray. If you read the book of Judges, that's Yakuba, hey?
Yes.
Yeah, Yakuba, if you read the book of Judges, you'll know, at the end, Dan goes totally bonkers and starts worshipping idols from the word go. So the guys think that Dan is excluded here because, in a sense, Dan excluded himself, or the tribe of Dan excluded itself right from the word go from the people. But it is one of the reasons why, you guys think this is not literally speaking of Israel itself.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Mandy, James here.
Yeah.
I don't know if this lends support as well to the considering the verse 9 to be the same group of people that's being referred to in verse 4. But the way you put it up there on the screen, it seems to follow the same pattern of John hearing one thing and seeing something else.
Thank you for pointing it out. Yeah.
That we saw earlier on with the lion and the lamb.
Yes. Yes, and that's a fantastic point. If you guys don't remember that, that's the whole idea in the book so far, is that James will hear something. Sorry, not James. John. John will hear something, and then he'll turn and he'll see what he is hearing. So yeah, this is the same thing. He hears the number 144,000. You're right, that does lend support to the symbolism of it. He hears that 144,000 are sealed. He turns around and he sees them. And it's not just people from Old Testament Israel. It's the true Israel, God's people from every tribe, tongue, and language. I mean, that makes chapter 7, if you think about it, that makes chapter 7 fantastic for you and I. It's always like, and I think I mentioned on Sunday, it's always a worry with Jehovah's Witnesses, when they were focused in the beginning of their existence on being one of the 144,000. And even now, most of the Jehovah's Witnesses would have to admit that they aren't, because there've been enough already before that. So in that sense, it forces them to say, well, there's a space for 144,000, and then there's a second space, a sort of second tier citizenship for the rest of us. Whereas, the comfort in this is humongous. John hears that every single one of God's covenant people is sealed. And then he turns and he looks, and you and I, if we're trusting in Jesus, are there. Every tribe, tongue, and nation. And it's such assurance, which is what I think, one of the big things Jesus wants us to see in the book of Revelation. So yeah, thanks for highlighting that. Any other awesome insights to come? Just to let you know that I can't see all of you on my screen. I can see the Warrens, I can see Milani, I can see Ron and Jenny Ross, and Ron and Jenny Edwards. I can see Tembi, and I can see Rian and Vedette. So I'm going to be picking on you guys for any wisdom and insight. You can't switch your camera off either now, it's too late. So you're the guys I'm looking at for any questions or comments, okay? Just FYI. Any from you? Yeah? No? Okay, I'm going to move on. The last one, which is not part of the big five, it's your bonus number, and it's just for you, James, is the 1,260 days, otherwise known as 42 months, otherwise known as 3.5 years, otherwise known as time times and half a time. The time times and half a time especially is tricky because it is from Daniel, and it comes from quite a sort of, I guess, not controversial part of Daniel, but an argued over part of Daniel. So this is, I guess, one of those where, you want to be careful not to be too arrogant in your understanding of it. But 42 months, if you turn back to Revelation 11, I'm actually going to read some of it. From verse 1, then I was given a measuring reed like a rod with these words, go and measure the temple of God and the altar and count those who worship there. But exclude the courtyard outside the temple. Don't measure it, because it is given to the nations, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months. There's that number. I will grant my 2 witnesses authority to prophesy for 1,260 days, dressed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees. Etc. Now I'm trying to think of where. No, so that's it. So there, those 2 numbers there. So 42 months are 1,260 days, are 3.5 years. And the considered opinion of the folks I've read is that time is a year, times therefore is 2 years, and half a time is half a year, which gives you 3.5 years. It looks to be, because it is really focused here in chapter 11, it's similar to the idea of 10 that we saw with Smyrna. So it looks to be a period in which the church, the 2 witnesses, so that's in John and our time, in the period in which we live, and it's a symbolic period of suffering of determined length, which ends in victory. So 42 months, or 1,260 days. So it's a reference to, because it comes out of, I think, a similar idea in Daniel, a period that these 2 witnesses, which is us, will go about witnessing to Christ and where we will suffer for it. So if you look at chapter 11, from verse 7 to verse 10, there is the martyrdom of the witnesses. The beast that comes out of the abyss will make war on them, conquer them, and kill them. Their dead bodies will lie in the main street of the great city, which figuratively is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. And people will view their bodies for 3.5 days. There's that 3.5 idea, and not permit their bodies to be put in the tomb, and they will be gloated over. So there's the suffering, the idea of the suffering of the witnesses of the church. But it ends in victory, because verse 11, but after 3.5 days, so I guess there's that period of 3.5, it's not years now, but days, the breath of life from God entered them and they stood on their feet. There's resurrection, there's victory. So there's the suffering, there's a period of time, but then there's resurrection, victory. The reason I wanted to end on this is that it's actually great news, because there is victory at the end. And you guys might be able to sort of have some understanding of this, that you've now gone through a period of suffering for the last time and a half, and it's now ended and done, and you might be experiencing a sense of victory. Cheesy joke to finish off with, sorry. So that's the 1,260 days. And that's the heart of Revelation in numbers. So most of the numbers you'll come across, you'll be able to fit into 2, 4, 7, 10, 12, or perhaps 3.5, like this one. And that's where I'm going to stop. Are there any questions for you guys? Anything that's still unclear, or that you want to still ask about? Is it quite a lot to take in, even though I tried to keep it a bit shorter this time? Okay, I'm going to pick on people. Inders, are you guys all right? Anything that you're unclear of or want to know?
Yeah, how to unmute this thing. There we go.
Listen, I can't project the slideshow, so don't ask me.
No, there's a lot to take in, but thanks very much, Mandy. I'm sorry, maths was never my strong suit, but it's been helpful. The one question I had, now I don't know if you might have given an explanation and I just missed it. I take your point about what's being said in chapter 7. The 12 tribes of Israel being mentioned by name, each with 12,000, so 12 plus 1,000. So that's the completeness there, the room for everyone point.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering from a hermeneutical point of view why, I mean, the way I read it, Mandy, and tell me if you think I'm wrong, is a progression. So initially you have Israel, and it's why the Jewish tribes are mentioned by name. So as a Gentile reader, I wouldn't have immediately thought, right, I'm included in Judah or Reuben or Gad or Asher. I would have understood that to me be a reference to racial Israel. And then the multitude that follows, it's almost like that sort of the progression of Isaiah, and now it's the nations. And that's where there's a reference made to us. But I understood you to be saying that we're actually, what's being described there is the same thing. Did I misunderstand you there? Was that what you're saying?
Yeah, so that, yeah, that is what I would see it as, and it goes back to the point that James raised, is how John in this book, you know, hears one thing, turns to see something else. So if you look at, you know, chapter 1, where he has the first vision of Jesus, and he was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard a loud voice behind me like a trumpet saying, write on the scroll. Verse 12, then I turned to see whose voice it was. And so now he sees what he has heard. In chapter 5 as well, we had, then one of the elders said to me, verse 5, do not weep. Look, the Lion from the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has conquered so that he's able to open the scroll and 7 seals. So that's what he hears from the elder. So he turns to see the Lion of Judah. What does he see? He sees one like a slaughtered lamb. And here in chapter 7, he hears the number of the sealed, and he hears them referenced. So he in his mind, he's probably going, yes, this is the people of the covenant people of God. But then he turns to see who it is, and he sees, it's just humongous.
I see that. Okay, thanks. That's helpful.
And I just think, just to go over again, what makes me doubt that it's it could be the Isaiah sort of vision of the Old Testament people and then the nations coming in. It could be that, but the way in which he writes, the order in which he writes the names of the tribes is so without precedence and so random that it doesn't make sense.
So having heard the tribes sealed, he turns and sees representatives of every nation. So there's that grafting in idea.
Yeah.
And with that, the church.
I think so.
Yeah, thanks, man.
I think that's the awesome thing about it, is that, is that idea, as you said, the grafting in, like we are part of God's people from beginning to end, in a sense, and me and the guy from 1000 BC from the tribe of Judah, who trusted in the Lord's promises. We're part of this multitude. We're sealed together. It's brilliant. You and King David are going to be rubbing shoulders, going, "Isn't Jesus wonderful?"
Mandels, I had a thought when you're talking about 2, and
Yeah.
do you think there might be a link to the Transfiguration, where
Yes.
you've got these 2 guys appear and this wonderful picture of Jesus in glory? It's almost testifying to kind of who he is, and this voice from heaven.
Yeah, so Moses and Elijah rock up on the Mount of Transfiguration. And yeah, you're right. And they are witnesses, in a sense. They bear witness to the glory of Jesus. Yes, I think you're right. That is why the 2 of them pitch up, because of this idea of 2 witnesses being the good witnesses. Thanks. I forgot to mention that. That's a great point. Ron and Jenny Edwards, you're looking at each other as if you've got something to ask. Jenny's going, "Ron, please ask it." And Ron's going, "I don't want to ask it." No. Cool. Okay. No, Glenn? No, I thought you were touching the unmute. All right, guys. Well, if that's it, hopefully this will help you on Sunday, especially when we see the number 4, we see the number 12, number 10, number 144,000, and it will mean that I don't have to explain so much on Sunday because you'll be waxed. Cool. All right. Pierre, you wanted to, you put your video on. Did you want to ask something or say something? No, you could. Okay, cool. Edge, I'm going to throw you under the bus and ask you to pray.
No problem. Cool. Let's pray. Oh, Father, we thank you that you are holy, holy, holy. And we praise you for tonight and the opportunity to get together and to understand this rich symbolism. Thank you for your word, which is just so beautiful. And as we've looked at it, and it is, in one sense, it feels a little complicated, and yet it just reminds us of how incredible your word is. And we are grateful that you have kept it for us. And you have given us minds that can understand it, and that it points us to your wonderful plan from the beginning of the world when you created it in 7 days, until that wonderful day when Jesus returns and we enjoy that 7th day again, perfect rest. And so I pray that this book, and particularly Sunday, as we think through being sealed, would just be a huge encouragement, and these numbers would just give us wonderful hope that Jesus is returning and that he is victorious, and we will have eternity with each other, this multitude of people glorifying you and your Son, who has forgiven our sin. And yeah, that would be a huge treasure to us now as we live in these 3.5 days, this time which will end. So give us hope, and thank you again for this evening, and for Mandy who's led us, and just pray that you'd continue to work in our hearts powerfully through this series. In Jesus' name, amen.